Today's shiur begins at the very top of Daf Nun Vov at the Mishnah. Hanoder min habayis muter be'aliyah. One who swears not to benefit from a bias. Again, the issue that we've mentioned already so many times in recent shiurim, are we going to translate or not? Best advice is not to translate because that limits you in understanding. But to give a flavor of things, bias in other contexts is often referred to as a house. And here you'll see the problem with that translation. Here a person swears not to benefit from a bias. He is allowed to benefit from aliyah. Aliyah, a second story. That's Rabbi Meir's opinion. In other contexts, you might see aliyah as a reference to an attic. V'chachamim omrim aliyah bichlal habayis. The aliyah is included within bias. Hanoder min aliyah, one who swears not to benefit from aliyah, muter b'bias. Everyone will agree that bias is not a subcategory of aliyah. So if he vowed not to benefit from aliyah, he is allowed to benefit from the bias. Man Tana. We have a Tanaic source, and we want to figure out who the author of this source would be. And it's interesting structurally to note that in response to this question of who is the author, you will see Rav Chisda and Abaye appearing, where Rav Chisda appears to offer we'll call it a limited explanation as to who the author is, and Abaye will offer a more expanded version of who the author is. We saw the same phenomenon on Daf Nun Dalid Amud Aleph, the lower half of the page, also where we marked with triangles, coincidentally, Rav Chisda and Abaye. That's simply by way of general structure and approach. In our case, we have a Tanaic source that comes from the topic of Nigei Botim. What are Nigei Botim? Maybe you're familiar with the term Tsaras, that has to do with an area of tumah, of defilement that results from discoloration. In the case of Tsaras, you can have Tsaras Adam, skin discoloration. There's Nega. Nega is a term we can use interchangeably. Negoyim and Tsaras, we can use them interchangeably. There's a reference, you can have that affecting clothing, Nigei Begodim, and there's also a realm called Nigei Botim, a discoloration. It might say it's a miraculous phenomenon. We don't experience this anymore on a practical halachic level, but there was, and maybe there is, but there was a reality of house walls changing color that is not a function of a burst pipe, let's put it that way, but it's a function of something else, more divine, which results in the house becoming defiled. That's Nigei Botim. The Tanaic source says, Ba bias, that's a word from the Torah, L'rabois es hayetzia, that comes to include the Yetzia as also subject to Nigei Botim. The Yetzia is a type of let's say structure that is attached to a house. You see in Maseches Bava Basra, if I'm not mistaken, a more extensive discussion concerning Yetzia, but for our purposes it would be a type of structure that is built alongside or attached to a house. You find the term Yetzia in the construction of the Beis Hamikdash with various chambers that open into the Beis Hamikdash proper. The term Babayis, L'rabois es ha'aliyah. In our discussion, Yetzia is not going to figure very prominently, but this section of the source will. And the term bias therefore comes to include the aliyah. Namely, regarding laws of Negoyim, the aliyah is affected. That if a discoloration on the walls of the aliyah apply, so whatever the Torah dictates regarding Nigei Botim applies to the discoloration of the walls of the aliyah. So, who is the author of this? Omer Rav Chisda Rabbi Meir he. This must be in accordance with Rabbi Meir. Di Rabbanan, Hoamri Rabbanan, if it were in accordance with the Rabbanan said, Aliyah Bichlal Habayis, Lomali Kra Babayis Lirbuye. The Aliyah is included in a house. What do you need a special Torah word, like a special extra word, where the Torah would, so to speak, go out of its way, adding a word to include the Aliyah, which is, according to the Rabbanan, included anyway in the term bias. So once the Torah says that a bias is subject to Negoyim, it's obvious that the Aliyah is included. You don't need an extra word for that purpose. So, who's the author of this? Rav Chisda tells you it's Rabbi Meir. According to Rabbi Meir, the Aliyah is not automatically included in a house, and if you want, therefore, the Aliyah to be included in the rules of Nigei Batim, you'll have to have a special Torah word to include it. Abaye Yom Afilu Tema Rabbanon. This Tanaic source can be in accordance with the Rabbanon as well. Bayakra, the Rabbanon need a pasuk for Negoyim to include the Aliyah. Now, why do the Rabbanan need a special pasuk to include the Aliyah in Negoyim? The Salka Daita Chamina, I would have thought, without the special pasuk, without the special word, the pasuk says regarding Negoyim, it says regarding the rules of tzoras, of houses, it says bebeis eretz achuzaschem ksiv. And from this pasuk, I would have got the wrong impression. The mechaber ba'ara shmei bayis, that which is attached to the ground, is called a house with regard to Negoyim. Aliyah halo mechaber ba'ara, the attic or the second story is not attached to the ground, and therefore maybe it's not subject to the laws of Negoyim, that for Negoyim to affect the house, I would have thought it has to be attached to the ground. Therefore, I have the additional word, Babayis, from that we saw in the Tanaic source, to include the Aliyah with regard to Negoyim. Keman Azla, Hod Yamar Rav Huna Barchi Mishmei De'ula. We have a question, it's a long question, you can see how we've marked it thusly, and we want to know, Ula's teaching, according to whom does it go? And what does Ula say? Bayis bebeisi ani mocher loch. If a person in a commercial transaction says, Bayis bebeisi, I am selling you. And Ula says, Mareu aliyah. The owner can show the customer the aliyah. In other words, the aliyah is referred to, or is included in the term Bayis bebeisi. Taima di'amarle bayis shebebesi ani mocher loch. Avol bayis stam eino mar'eu aliyah. If a person had said, I am selling you a bayis, you would not be able to show him that you bought the aliyah. So, just to review, in order for aliyah to be the item of sale, the owner would have had to say bayis bebeisi. But by saying bayis ani mocher loch, that alone would not have included the aliyah. So lema Rabbi Meir he, should I say that the teaching of Ula is in accordance with the minority, the singular opinion of only Rabbi Meir. You saw in the Mishnah that by vowing not to benefit from a bias, that doesn't include aliyah. So this teaching of Ula would seem to be in accordance with only Rabbi Meir. The Gemara says, not so. Afilu teimo Rabbanan. Ula's teaching can agree with the Rabbanan as well. My aliyah, the teaching of Ula said, Bayis bebeisi ani mocher loch, you can show him aliyah. You know what aliyah means? Me'ula shebebotim. The Rashi comments, Afilu teima Rabbanan, lo teima aliyah mamish. In interpreting or in translating Ula's words, don't explain aliyah as meaning an attic. Elamai aliyah de katani. Me'ula shebenechosav. The word aliyah from the word me'ula means best quality of property. Habayis hameshubach shebebesav tzorach litein lo. That in this sale, if a person says bayis bebesi ani mocherloch, you are expected to be selling the customer the best of your properties. Hey chodikomar bayis vesi. Avali haviyomar bayis stam. If a person would have just used the word bayis without the compound expression bayis bebesi, haya yochol aros lo aliyah mamish. He would be entitled to show the customer that you are purchasing an attic. The aliyah b'chlal bayis, the word bayis includes aliyah, just like the Rabbanan said. The Mishnah. Hanoider min hamita muter bedargish. Divrei Rebbe Meir. A person who swears not to benefit from a mita. Now the word mita will translate as a bed. He is not prohibiting himself from a dargish. Now this word we cannot translate at this early point. But suffice it to say that according to Rabbi Meir, dargish is not included in mita. V'chachamim omrim dargish bichlal mita. Nachom disagree that the dargish is included, and if he vowed not to benefit from mita, he will not be able to benefit from dargish either. Hanoder min dargish, a person who vowed not to benefit from a dargish, muter b'mita. He is allowed to benefit from the bed. My dargish, the obvious question, a question that will preoccupy our Gemara, clear down half of Omid Beis till the next Mishnah. On the side of the Gemara, the Nosei, the topic heading that we have is Mita, Dargish, Mahu Dargish, and under the Mivneh heading, the structural note, a diamond appears as they will in the Gemara. These are Deos be Mahu Dargish. So that, get a bird's eye view of the Gemara before we get into the text. Ula is number one. And he says that a Dargish is an Arsa de Gada. We'll see later that it will translate it as a good luck bed. Where do you see the second diamond? So you'll have to scan over to to Omid Beis, and you'll see Ravin is highlighted in a diamond, and the double underline that appears a few lines later has his explanation of Dargish is Arsa de Tzola, a leather bed. By way of additional markings, you see that we've used a trapezoid or volcano shape, which represents a ma'akav, an attempt to keep track of a back and forth, a vigorous give and take discussion. The narrow shape, the narrow part of the volcano shape facing upwards represents kushya alul. We have difficulty for ula. The inverted is a tshuva, a response. So if you can do the following exercise, this is one of the special features of Gemara markings, even though we're part of the Daf Yomi scheme of things right now. The special feature of Gemara markings Daf Yomi is the structural emphasis that we place on the Gemara. So take a look at the volcano shape. Can you skim ahead? So the first appearance of it is as a question on Ula. And then it flips over, which would be a response. Again a question, then a response. But continue on to Omid Beis. You notice the last volcano shape? Yep, you see it 3 lines from the top. That is a question mode. A question on Ula. And as a result of that, we're led to a second approach, an alternative to Ula, as we will see in the name of Ravin. So in the meantime, the Gemara will be focusing on Ula's explanation and we'll say giving it a rough time. The Gemara, my Dargish, what is Dargish? Omar Ula Arsa de Gada, a good luck bed. Basically, it's a regular bed. However, no one will sleep on it. And don't ask me why, but it was held as a good luck item for people to have such a thing. It's a regular bed, but never used. The word gada And you can see in the Meforshim the etymology of that word has to do with luck. Omru le Rabbanon le'ula. Hadisnan. We have a Tanaic source that's quoted, of course, out of context, but the main point is the fact that in this source the Dargish will appear. So just by way of background, the source deals with a king that becomes a mourner. Now, mourners would, for the laws of mourning, dictate that a person who is a mourner, lo aleinu, sits on the ground. What happens if a king becomes a mourner? He can't sit in his regular kingly throne. That's not in consonance with the situation of being a mourner. So what does he do? Another aspect of mourning that will be featured here is that a mourner, certainly on the first day of mourning, after the relative is interred, he is provided with a meal by the community. In other words, he does not eat from his own food. This applies to a king as well. The source says, Keshem Mavrin Oisei. Mavrin is the verb form of providing the meal, and also as a pronoun, him. It's a reference to the king who became a mourner. Kol ha'am mesubin al ha'aretz. The people, the subjects, they sit on the floor. V'hu mesav al hadargish. And the king will sit on a dargish. And now the Rabbanan developed the question that they want to direct to Ula. You said that a dargish is a good luck bed. You never sit on it. Kula shasa lo yosef Allah ahu yoma yosef Allah. Could it be that all throughout the year no one would sit on it, and that day that he happens to be a mourner, he's going to sit on it? It's like isn't that out of character with regard to the day? It's odd, isn't it? And that's the result, though. If you're going to insist that a dargish is an arsa de gado, that's the situation you'll see. Maskif lo Ravina. Ravina says if that's your objection to, that's not an objection. That's not a question. Look at the issue of the food. Tekula shasa iboy ochil v'iboy lo ochil. Throughout the year, the eating of meat and wine is optional. If you want to eat, if you can eat. If you don't want to, you don't. And on that day, we, the public, we provide him with the meat and wine. And Rashi adds the presence of wine for a mourner is sanctioned by the pasuk, which says v'yayin l'mari nefesh. The people that are of bitter spirit, someone who loses a close one, is of bitter spirit. Wine is used by that to dissipate the intense feelings. So that this idea of something, let's say, special on the day of mourning, which is not characteristic, not practiced the rest of the year, is something that you find, in fact, as part of the laws of mourning. So that if he's going to be sitting on a bed that he ordinarily wouldn't be sitting on, fine. Ela hokashia. But if you want to raise a question, now we'll raise a question. Desanya. Dargish loya koifeolo zoifo. Another rule of mourning, and this might not appear familiar to many of us, but as far as the laws of the Talmud are concerned, part of mourning involves the inverting of beds. Beds were flipped over. This source says that if one owns a dargish, it wasn't flipped over. Kofeos to invert something. So what would you do with a dargish? You would stand it upright. So it wouldn't be in its regular position. It would be stood upright, but not inverted. If you're going to say, like Ula said, that a dargish is a regular bed, just not used. Do we not have the following source that says that a mourner has to invert his bed, lo mitoso bilvadhu kaifa, not only his own personal bed, all beds in the house, all beds, including a good luck bed. has to be inverted. So it must be that a dargish is not what Ula called it, an arsa degada. Gemara says, Halo Kashya, this isn't the problem. This is not an objection to explaining dargish as arsa degada. The Gemara continues at the top of Omid Beis. Midi dahave amita hamiyuchedes lekelim. The non-inverting of the dargish, which might very well be, like Ula said, a good luck bed, is the same law that applies to a bed whose exclusive purpose is as a display shelf. Mita, a bed that's miyuchedes lekelim, that's reserved for storing or for holding vessels. Desanya, im hoisa mita miyuchedes lekelim, if he has a bed that's used as a display shelf, ein tzorach l'chbos, you don't have to invert it. So it's true we have this sweeping, sounding halach of all beds must be inverted, but there are exceptions, and exceptions will include mita miyuchedes lekelim, might very well refer to a good luck bed also. It doesn't need to be inverted. Elo, but if you're going to raise an objection to Ula, I've got one for you. Desanya, Reb Shimon ben Gamliel Oimer, Dargosh, regarding the laws of Kfiyas Hamita. We're staying within the topic of inverting beds. Reb Shimon Gamliel says, when you have a Dargosh, Matir Karbitov Noifel Me'elov, you loosen the Karbitov, you loosen the loops and the straps, and it falls down onto it falls down the center portion of the bed. Once you loosen the straps and the loops, it will fall downwards. Now we haven't explained. We've translated some words. I hope that the diagrams that accompany this sugya are readily available, and you can see what we're referring to. And we'll get back to that in a minute. But what's the main problem? The Gemara says, "V'im dargish arsa degadahu." If a dargish is what Ula said, a good luck bed, karbitin means like does a regular bed have loops and straps? It doesn't. A regular bed is constructed another way. I'm not going to say necessarily it's a box spring mattress type bed that many of us are familiar with, that you buy in furniture stores, but it might very well be that. That might be a good example. So that let's say a regular mattress type bed doesn't have loops and straps. So the dargish must be something else, not an arsa degada. An arsa degada is a regular bed that was used for good luck, but a regular bed doesn't have karbitov. Ki also Rovin Omar. Shiulte lahu me'arbonon Rav Tachlifa bar Marova Shmei. When Rovin came, he said, I asked someone of the scholars whose name was Rav Tachlifa, he was a regular, he used to pass through the leather market where they sold sheets of leather. The Omar Li, my dargish, and he explained to me, you know what a dargish is? Arsa tetzala. It's a leather bed. Rashi, Arsa Detzala, you'll see the Rashi, the second of the narrow lines, Shel Or, Shiyoshen Elel, Avol Eino Chashuva Kokach. It's a bed frame, and take a look at the diagrams if you have them available. You can see a type of 4 legs with a frame and a sheet of leather that's attached to the frame with straps, but it's not considered of significance. Since it's not so important, you wouldn't flip it over as you would a regular bed of significance. You would stand it upright. We saw that in our Gemara, in the source that was quoted on Omen Aleph, 4 lines from the bottom, where it said Dagish lo yakefelo zoikfei. So Rashi continues, since it's not important, he wasn't kaifa, he stood up, and that's enough as far as fulfilling the laws of mourning. And therefore, in our Mishnah, when someone swore or once vowed not to benefit from a mito, the muta bedargish, sheino mito chashuva, he's allowed to partake of a dargish. It's not important. In other words, it's not his vow was to preclude his benefit from something of importance. The dargish wasn't on his mind. It's not important. And in fact, in Arsa Ditzola, like Rovin related, has karbitin, has these loops and straps. Upolig Rab Shimon Gamliel Bakamor V'Yamar the boy kfia kol kach shematir karbitin ve'or noifel me'elov. Rab Shimon Gamliel is telling us that, as opposed to the Rabbanan who disagree, that it does need kfia. In other words, standing it upright is not enough. Now, how do you do kfiyah to a dargish? So you loosen the loops and the straps and the central portion of the bed, which is that the sheet of leather, noifel me'el, it falls groundwards. There are straps that surround the leather, the sheet of leather. And they're ordinarily the straps are drawn taut on the bed frame. And you tie the straps to the bed frame. And you are able to sleep on it. And in the past, I used to imagine a trampoline. I don't know if as this recording is made, that's how trampolines appear. But nevertheless, it's this idea of a sheet of material with straps from all sides, and those are wrapped around a frame. When you loosen the straps and the central sheet of material of leather falls to the ground, that's the ultimate in kfiyah, of inverting, of flipping over the bed. So now we turn back to the Gemara. Itmar ezo mita ve'ezo dargash. Can we describe a difference between a mita and a dargish? So here the Gemara is going to deal with a mita in a fashion that's different than what we suggested before when we spoke about the box spring mattress type bed. We did so for illustrative purposes only, in order to establish a strong contrast between the mita and the dargish. Here, though, you're going to see another approach where, in fact, the mita and the dargish seem to be kind of close to one another, but nevertheless a difference. So here the Gemara asks, what is a mita and what is a dargish? Omar Rav Yirmiyan, we have a new shape here, a house shape on the side under the Nosei Mivne heading. The house represents Hezberim al Mahu HaHevdel Bein Mita LeDargish. What is the difference between them? So Rav Yirmiyan says, Mita Misargin Oisa al Gaba, the straps. And if you have the diagrams and you look at the diagrams, you can see you can see how we've tried to illustrate some of these points. There's diagram number 1 and diagram number 4. They try to illustrate how the straps go over al gaba on the frame, the wood frame of the bed. And dargish misargin oisoi migufo. This is Rav Yirmiyan. We're going to be changing things as we go on in the Gemara, but in the meantime, the dargish, the straps go through the frame, and that you can see is illustrated in diagram number 3, sirugo mitocho, where you see their frames. The frame has holes in it, and the straps that emerge from the central portion, the central leather portion, the straps that emerge go through the holes in the frame. So the mita is the straps are wrapped around the frame, and the dargish, the straps go through holes in the frame. The Gemara asks, Meisvei, we're challenging Rav Yirmiyah from a source that deals with a seemingly unrelated topic, but it deals with the defilement of wooden vessels. And here we're going to speak about beds and bed frames. When do they, at what point would they be subject to defilement? And as far as the laws of defilement are concerned, an item, a vessel, does not become defiled unless it has reached a certain level of completion. A vessel in its very early stages of development is not a vessel. It's not ready for use. So we have a source that says, Kli eitz me'emosai mekablin tuma, wooden vessels, at what point are they ready, are they subject to defilement? Hamita v'harisa, a mita, and an arisa is a cradle, mishe yeshufim ba'or hadag. When the wood is rubbed with fish skin. What happens is fish skin, apparently when you rub it, when you sand down a wood frame with fish skin, it develops a certain gleam to it, a certain shine, and it looks nice. So at that point, that's like the end, that's the final stage for tumah, contracting tumah purposes, is this mishi yeshufei bor hadag. Did we not say that you're doing this for, we'll say for attraction, for let's say cosmetic purposes, to make it look nice? If you're going to define, as Rav Yirmiyah said, a mita, the straps are wrapped around the frame where you won't even be able to see the wood. The wood is covered with the straps. Why would the tumah standard be delayed until the rubbing of the fish skin on it? There's no need to rub the fish skin on it. You don't something that's going to be covered over anyway doesn't need to be rubbed down with the fish skin. Ella, approach number 2, hava migufan. Not just the dargish, but the bed also, the straps that extend forth from the central mattress, the straps aren't wrapped around the bed frame, but rather through the bed frame. So then what's the difference between the mita and the dargish? So mita, uli vafuki bebzini. Dargish, uli vafuki beavaksa. So here we have, using our diagrams again, the idea of the mita is that the straps are threaded through holes in the frame itself. The strap itself goes through the holes. That's auli vafuki, goes in and out through the holes, but an emphasis is on the straps themselves. The dargish, if you see, there's an illustration, I don't know how clear it is, but illustration number 5 has the holes hold loops. And through the loops that are suspended from the bed frame holes, the straps of the mattress are threaded through the loops that extend down from the holes in the bed frame. So I hope that is understandable, especially with the diagrams. So the maskana of the Gemara is the mita would look like what you see in illustration 3, and the dargish would look like what we see in illustration 5. Omer of Yankiv bar Achom Rebbe, mita shenakliteha yoitzin zoikfa v'dayo. Here we're not dealing with dargish anymore. We're dealing with laws of kfiyas hamita, the inverting of a bed in a mourner's house. What happens if you have a canopy bed? If you look at, there's an illustration that you can see on our page of illustrations. A bed looks like a pup tent above the bed. It's simply a canopy bed. You can't flip it around to invert it. The upright poles wouldn't support the canopy bed if it's inverted. So what is the suggestion? So he says, do what you see in illustration 7. You stand it up on its side, you stand it upright, and that's your fulfillment of Kfiyas Hamita. Rav Yankiv Baridi, Rav Yeshua ben Levi, Halacha Reb Shimon ben Gamliel. This is a reference to Reb Shimon Gamliel's ruling on the dargish. You see an arrow to the side of the Gemara. In that case, Reb Shimon Gamliel, he had argued with the Chachamim. The Chachamim said with a dargish you stand it upright. Reb Shimon says no, that's not enough, but rather you have to loosen the straps. The Mishnah. On the side we have a topic heading, Hanoder min ha'ir, Ozer be'ibura shel. A person who swears not to enter a city, not to benefit from a city, he cannot benefit from the ibura shel ir either. The ibura shel ir is a belt around a city measuring a little more than 70 amos surrounding the city. On the next point in our heading is Hanodir min habayis osur rak mimokom hagofas hadelis v'lifnim. A person who swears not to benefit from a house. Now a house has an entranceway to it, and the entranceway is an area of the house where the door closes. Now the entranceway itself is deeper or is thicker than the door. The door closes in the entranceway at a certain point. Say halfway into the entranceway, you have the door stopper, if you will, where the door is shut and it remains shut within its door frame. The door frame or the entranceway being deeper or thicker than the door itself. So when a person swears not to benefit from a house, he is he's allowed to stand in the entranceway, but not beyond where the door closes. What we just described then is what in our introduction we mean that the Isser, the prohibition of benefiting from the house, is only from Mokum Hagofas Hadelis, from the point at which the door closes and inwards. But the point from outside the door's closing, even though you're still in the entranceway, you're not considered, as far as Nedarim purposes are concerned, you're not considered in the house. The Mishnah. Hanoider min ha'ir muter likones l'tchuma shel ir. A person who vows not to enter a city is allowed to enter the tchum. The tchum is an area surrounding a city measuring 2,000 amos. 2,000 amos around a city is called the tchum of the city. Many of you might be familiar with the term tchum from Hilchos Shabbos. The concept of tchum also appears in the Torah concerning the Levite cities. The Levium didn't inherit large sections of the land of Israel like the other tribes, but they did receive cities, and the cities include the tchum around them as far as the Levium inheritance. However, as far as Nedarim are concerned, one who vows not to enter a city is allowed to enter the tchum. The Ozer likones le'ibura. However, he cannot go so close to the city that he's within the ibur, which is a belt around the city of 70 amos and a fraction. Abul hanoider min habayis, a person who swears not to or vows not to benefit from a house, Ozer min ha'agaf v'lifnim. He is prohibited from entering the house from the point of where the door closes and in, but from the point in the entranceway that the door has already closed outwards. Even though you're in the entranceway of the house, you're not considered in violation of a vow of someone who was nodir min habayis. Minolan de ibura de masa kemasa domi. From where do we know that the ibur of a city is considered like the city? Amar Rav Yochanan Yamar Kra. The pasuk says Vayibos Yeshua b'Yericho v'chulei. The pasuk describes Joshua, who led the Jewish people into the land of Israel and encountered a battle with the city of Yericho. It says, and Joshua and Yeshua was in Yericho. What does it mean within Yericho? It was literally in the city of Yericho. Yericho Sogeres and Sugeres. The pasuk describes Yericho as being totally sealed up. You couldn't Outsiders couldn't enter it. We have to conclude, therefore, that he wasn't in the city literally, but he was within the Ibor, and nevertheless he's described as if he's in Yericho. Well, if you say that the city was closed and yet he was in Yericho, maybe it was within the Tchum, and that the Tchum would be considered being in the city. The Gemara says, Hoksiv b'tchumo. Regarding Tchum, the Torah says, and we mentioned before the Levite cities, it says, Umadoisem michutz lo'ir. The Tchum being described in this pasuk is referred to as outside the city. So the Tchum cannot be considered as being the city. Hanoder min habayis einu oser elo min ho'agaf v'lifnim. Avo min ho'agaf v'lachutz lo. Our Mishnah implies that from the point at which the door closes and outwards, you're allowed to be. You're not prohibited. In other words, that's not house. Mosiv Rav Mori. Rav Mori raises an objection from a Tanaic source. This Tanaic source deals with the topic we mentioned earlier, Nigei Botim, a house that becomes defiled through the appearance of a nega. Part of the process involves a Kohen coming to investigate the house and ruling upon that which he sees. Now there's a pasuk that is found in Vayikra, Perek Yudalid, pasuk Lamed Ches, and the pasuk is quoted in the Gemara text, but in sections. The entire pasuk, though, we've included on the side, and it says, "V'yotza kohen min habayis el pesach habayis v'izkiras habayis shivas yomim." The kohen, we'll say the first stage of nega development or determination, the nega needs a kohen ruling in order to determine what we are to do, how we are to proceed with the establishment of the house as a bayis menuga. So it says that the kohen, after entering the house, he leaves the house and he closes it up for a period of 7 days, following which he'll come and investigate it again. But in the meantime, we don't have to get into the details of Nigei Botem. What we want to focus is on this idea of the kohen leaving the house and closing the door of the suspect house, the suspect of having negoyim. So what does it say in this Tanaic source? It says, "V'yotza kohen min habayis," and the kohen leaves the house. Yochel yelech lebeiso v'yaski. Does that mean that the kohen goes all the way home to his house, and through an agent or maybe a very long rope that's tied to the door, he then closes the door after the kohen gets home to his own domicile? Is that the way things are done? Talmud Lomar, the pasuk says, "El Pesach Habayis." The closing of the house on the part of the kohen is when he's at the door of the afflicted house, not when he gets home to his own place. Well, El Pesach Habayis Yochol Yamo Tachas Hamashkoif V'Yaskir. If you're going to emphasize El Pesach Habayis, does that mean that the kohen stands underneath within the threshold, the mashkof, within the door frame, and closes the door that way? Talmud Lomar Min Habayis Ad Shietze Min Habayis Kulo. The closing of the door on the part of the kohen is only when the kohen leaves the house entirely. Well, so how is that accomplished? Oimed betzad hamashkoif. He stands right outside the entranceway, v'yasgir, and closes the house, closes the door that way. Uminayin sheim holach lebeis of iskir. From where do we know that if the kohen went to his own house and used the long rope approach or an emissary to close the house, the afflicted house, o she'oma tachas hashakuf v'iskir, or the kohen stood within the entranceway and closed it, shezgera muskar, that's also considered a fulfillment of the laws of closing the house. Talmud Lomar v'hiskiras habayas mikol makom. You have the additional expression in the pasuk indicating that any form of closing is also considered a closing. But what's the main point? The main point is that in order for the closing to take place, he has to be outside of the house. And how is that? That's only if he's not in the entranceway whatsoever. But once he's in the entranceway, even though it's at a point beyond the closing of the door, he's still considered in the house. So how can you say that standing within the entranceway is not considered within the house, when according to these laws of Negoyim, Nigei Botim, standing within the entranceway, even though you're outside of where the door closes, you're still considered in the house? The Gemara says the realm of Nigei Botim is governed by verses that are unique to the realm of Nigei Botim and don't determine the laws of Nedarim, of vows. Shiny, Gabi, bias. It's different with regard to the laws of Negoyim. Dechtiv, there's a special reference in the verse that says min habayis. At shietze min habayis kulo. He has to completely leave the house beyond what's commonly accepted as being outside the house. So as far as Nedarim are concerned, there we're governed by what's commonly accepted as being outside the house, and that's Mino Agaf, from the Agaf Ilachutz, from where the door closes, from that point outwards, you're considered outside the house with regard to the laws of vows. And hence, as we saw in the Mishnah, someone who's Nedarim Abayas, his prohibition is only being from the point that the door closes inwards, but not from that point outwards, even though you're still in the entranceway. With that, we conclude our shiur for today.